Welcome to another episode of Forgotten Whispers. I'm your host, and today we delve into a tale so disturbing that many historians have deliberately obscured its details from public record. This is the story of the Harrowdale family, a lineage plagued by inexplicable tragedies, bizarre occurrences, and a persistent shadow that followed them across centuries and continents. Before we begin, I must warn you. What you're about to hear isn't for the faint of heart. The history of the Harrowdales isn't merely a chronicle of misfortune. It's a testament to forces beyond our comprehension, forces that some believe were determined to erase this bloodline from existence. Our story begins in 1652 on the rugged coast of Cornwall, England, where Alistair Harrowdale, a minor nobleman with grand ambitions, established the family estate known as Griffin's Ledge. The property was obtained under suspicious circumstances. The previous owners, the Kestrel family, all perished in a mysterious fire just weeks before Alistair acquired the land for a fraction of its worth. Those familiar with the area often spoke of the land's troubled history. Local folklore suggested that the grounds of Griffin's Ledge had once been sacred to pagan worshippers, a place where the veil between our world and something else was frighteningly thin. Yet Alistair, a man of science and skepticism, dismissed such tales as the superstitious ramblings of uneducated peasants. Alistair's wife, Isolde, however, was less dismissive. From the moment she stepped foot on the grounds, she claimed to hear whispers in the walls, soft, unintelligible murmurs that followed her throughout the house. She complained of vivid nightmares in which she witnessed generations of her unborn children suffering horrific fates. These dreams were so disturbing that Isolde began to keep a detailed journal, which would later become one of the most important primary sources in understanding the Harrowdale curse. "I saw them all tonight," she wrote in one particularly haunting entry. "Children I have not yet born, and their children, and their children's children. All of them suffering, all of them dying before their time. And behind them all, a shadow, watching, waiting, hungering. It knows their names, names I have not yet chosen. It knows their faces, faces I have not yet seen. And it is patient, so very patient." Within a year of moving to Griffin's Ledge, Isolde gave birth to twins, a boy named Rowan and a girl named Lilia. The delivery was difficult, and the midwife later reported that the babies were born with unusual birthmarks, small, crescent-shaped marks at the base of their necks, which seemed to darken and fade with the phases of the moon. For a time, life at Griffin's Ledge appeared normal. Alistair's business ventures flourished, and the twins grew into healthy, if somewhat peculiar, children. They were inseparable, often speaking in a private language that no one else could understand. They would be found wandering the grounds at night, claiming to be following the whispering ones who told them secrets about the future. The first true tragedy struck on the twins' 7th birthday. During their celebration, young Lilia wandered away from the party and disappeared into the dense woods surrounding the estate. A search party was organized immediately, but the girl seemed to have vanished without a trace. 3 days later, Rowan began screaming in the middle of the night, insisting that his sister was calling to him from the old well on the eastern edge of the property, a well that had been sealed before the Harrowdales had even moved in. When Alistair and the servants went to investigate, they found the well's heavy stone cover had somehow been moved aside. At the bottom, they discovered Lilia's body, her eyes open and staring, her mouth frozen in a silent scream. What disturbed the investigators most was not just the girl's death, but the condition of her body. Despite having been missing for 3 days, Lilia showed no signs of decomposition. Her skin was cold to the touch, yet she had no water in her lungs, suggesting she hadn't drowned. Most bizarrely, clutched in her hand was a small, intricately carved stone figurine of unknown origin, a hunched, inhuman shape with too many limbs and what appeared to be tentacles emerging from its back. The local constable, a superstitious man named Silas Croft, wrote in his report, "The child's death bears no natural explanation. The well was sealed, the stone cover too heavy for a child to move. And that accursed figurine, I have seen its like only once before in a book of forbidden knowledge that should never have been written. If this is what I fear it is, then God help the Harrowdales, for nothing else can." Lilia's death changed the family irrevocably. Isolde retreated into herself, spending her days writing frantically in her journals and her nights wandering the halls of Griffin's Ledge, listening to the whispers that now seemed to follow her everywhere. Alistair threw himself into his work, often traveling for months at a time, as if trying to escape the shadow that had fallen over his home. Rowan, however, underwent the most disturbing transformation. Once a bright, talkative child, he became withdrawn and silent. He refused to leave his room during daylight hours, claiming that the sun hurts them, and when they hurt, they make me hurt too. The only person he would speak to was his mother, and servants reported overhearing their conversations in which Rowan would sometimes speak in his sister's voice, relaying messages from what he called the other side. 2 years after Lilia's death, disaster struck again. A mysterious illness swept through the household, killing 5 servants in a matter of days. The symptoms were unlike anything the local physician had ever seen. Extreme sensitivity to light, followed by the appearance of crescent-shaped lesions similar to the birthmarks on the Harrowdale twins, and finally, a kind of madness in which the victims would babble about the whispering ones before their bodies simply stopped. Not through any detectable failure of the heart or lungs, but as if whatever animated them had simply departed. Alistair, who had been away on business, returned to find his household in chaos and his wife on the brink of madness. Determined to understand what was happening, he began to research the history of the land on which Griffin's Ledge stood. What he discovered horrified him. The area had indeed been a site of pagan worship, but not of any recognized cult or religion. Ancient texts referred to a group called the Keepers of the Veil, who believed that certain locations around the world served as doorways to other dimensions, places where entities not of our reality could cross over. Griffin's Ledge, it seemed, was built upon one such doorway. The keepers had performed rituals to keep whatever existed on the other side from crossing over. But these rituals required blood sacrifice, a tradition the Kestrel family, the previous owners of the land, had maintained in secret for generations. When they all perished in the fire, the ritual stopped. And according to the text Alistair uncovered, when the ritual stopped, the door began to open. Alistair, a man of reason now faced with the unreasonable, made a fateful decision. If blood was required to close the door, then blood would be provided. Not the blood of innocents, as the keepers and kestrels had used, but the blood of those who had unwittingly opened the door, his own family. On the winter solstice of 1661, Alistair performed a ritual of his own design, combining elements from the keeper's texts with his own scientific knowledge. Isolde and Rowan were willing participants, both convinced by now that something unnatural had attached itself to their family. The ritual took place in the cellar of Griffin's Ledge, directly above what Alistair believed to be the doorway. The details of what occurred that night were never fully documented, but what is known is that by morning, Alistair was dead, his body found at the center of an intricate symbol drawn in his own blood. Isolde and Rowan survived, but both bore new crescent marks on their palms, marks that, unlike their natural birthmarks, did not fade with the moon's phases. In her journal, Isolde wrote, "The door is closed, but not locked. Alistair has bought us time, but at such a cost. The shadow remains watching, waiting. It has tasted our blood now, and it will not forget it. It will follow our line, seeking a way back. We must scatter, hide, ensure that the blood of the Harrowdales is diluted until whatever seeks us can no longer recognize its taste. This is our burden now, to ensure our bloodline never gathers in strength again. For if it does, the door will open once more. Following Alistair's death, Isolde and Rowan left Griffin's Ledge. The manor was boarded up, and rumors spread that it was haunted. Those brave or foolish enough to venture onto the grounds reported hearing whispers and seeing strange, flickering shadows even on the brightest of days. Isolde and Rowan traveled south, eventually settling in London, where they lived under the assumed name of Hawthorne. Rowan, now a young man, married a woman named Sarah Collins, and together they had 3 children: James, Thomas, and Anne. None of the children bore the crescent birthmark, leading Isolde to hope that perhaps whatever had attached itself to their family had finally let go. This hope proved short-lived. On his 18th birthday, James Harrowdale, now Hawthorne, began to experience the same nightmares his grandmother had described in her journals. Visions of generations yet unborn, suffering and dying before their time. And behind them all, the shadow, still watching, still waiting. Isolde, realizing that the entity had not forgotten them, but had merely been biding its time, made a desperate decision. The Harrowdale bloodline had to be scattered even further. Using the last of the family's wealth, she arranged for each of her grandchildren to be sent to different corners of the world. James to the American colonies, Thomas to France, and Anne to Scotland. Each was given a new identity and a sealed letter to be opened on their 30th birthday, explaining their true heritage and the curse that followed their bloodline. Isolde herself remained in London with Rowan, both of them now dedicated to researching any possible means of breaking the curse permanently. They corresponded with scholars and occultists across Europe, gathering knowledge about similar cases and potential remedies. One such correspondent was a Dutch scholar named Martin de Vries, who had studied numerous family curses across the continent. His conclusion was both fascinating and disturbing. What you describe is not a curse in the traditional sense, but a form of parasitic entity, one that attaches itself to bloodlines rather than individuals. Such entities feed on the life force of their hosts over generations, growing stronger with each death. They are patient predators, willing to wait centuries for their prey to multiply before they feast. The only documented cases of such entities being defeated involve the complete extinction of the targeted bloodline. This revelation led Isolde to a grim realization. The only way to truly end the curse was to end the Harrowdale line entirely. But she could not bring herself to advocate for such a drastic measure. Instead, she and Rowan continued to search for an alternative, developing a set of rituals and precautions that could at least keep the entity at bay. These included never allowing multiple Harrowdale descendants to live under the same roof, performing a specific cleansing ritual on each full moon, and most importantly, ensuring that no Harrowdale ever returned to Griffin's Ledge or the surrounding area, where the entity's influence was strongest. Rowan died in 1685 at the age of 32, relatively young, but older than many cursed Harrowdales would live to be. Isolde survived him by another 15 years, using her remaining time to compile all their research into a comprehensive grimoire that she sent copies of to each of her grandchildren. This book, known as the Harrowdale Legacy, would become a crucial guide for future generations attempting to navigate their cursed heritage. The story now splits into 3 branches, following the descendants of James, Thomas, and Anne. Each branch encountered its own manifestations of the curse, shaped by the cultures and circumstances in which they found themselves. James Harrowdale, now James Foster, established himself in Massachusetts, where he became a successful merchant. He married twice and fathered 6 children, none of whom knew of their true heritage until their 30th birthdays, when James revealed the truth and distributed copies of his grandmother's grimoire. The American branch of the Harrowdale family seemed to fare better than their European counterparts, possibly due to the distance from Griffin's Ledge. However, they still experienced their share of tragedies. Every third generation, a child would be born with the crescent birthmark, and these children invariably died before reaching adulthood, usually in bizarre accidents involving water or reflective surfaces. One particularly disturbing case was that of Eliza Foster, born in 1751 with the telltale birthmark. At the age of 7, she was found drowned in a puddle barely deep enough to cover her face. Witnesses claimed that in the moments before her death, the puddle's surface had shown not a reflection of the sky above, but what appeared to be a window into somewhere else, a place of twisted geometries and impossible colors. The French branch, descended from Thomas, integrated into the aristocracy under the name Lafayette. They approached the curse from a more scientific perspective, documenting each manifestation meticulously and seeking rational explanations. This analytical approach served them well until the French Revolution, when their association with the nobility led to most of the family being executed. One survivor, Marguerite Lafayette, escaped to England, where, in a twist of fate, she settled in the very village near Griffin's Ledge without knowing its significance to her family history. The consequences were immediate and severe. Within weeks of her arrival, the entire village was plagued by nightmares. Children reported seeing a tall, thin figure with too many joints watching them from windows and doorways. Livestock died mysteriously, their bodies found drained of blood with crescent-shaped wounds on their necks. Marguerite herself began to waste away, her body aging decades in a matter of months. When a local historian finally made the connection between Marguerite Lafayette and the long-abandoned Griffin's Ledge estate, the villagers turned on her. She was found dead in her cottage, her body contorted in a position that human bones should not have been able to achieve. Her eyes and mouth sewn shut with an unidentified black thread that medical examiners could not cut or burn. The Scottish branch, taking the name MacLeod, turned to the church for protection. Many became clergy, believing that faith could shield them from the curse. This branch produced the most detailed records of their encounters with the entity, which they interpreted as a demon sent to test their faith. Reverend Malcolm MacLeod, writing in 1805, described his encounter. "It came to me in the form of my dead sister, perfect in every detail save for her eyes, which were windows into a void so profound that to gaze into them was to know the true meaning of infinity. It spoke with her voice, offering me knowledge beyond mortal understanding in exchange for a simple favor, to gather the scattered Harrowdale descendants for a family reunion at the ancestral home. I refused, of course, and began to recite the prayers my grandmother taught me. As I spoke, its form melted like wax, revealing something beneath the borrowed flesh, something with too many angles, too many mouths. It retreated, but not before promising to return when my faith wavered." Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, the scattered Harrowdale descendants, now bearing dozens of different surnames, largely managed to keep the curse at bay by following Isolde's precautions. But as generations passed and family connections grew more distant, knowledge of the curse became diluted, dismissed as superstition, or forgotten entirely. The turning point came in 1895 when an American industrialist named Josiah Crane purchased the long-abandoned Griffin's Ledge estate with the intention of restoring it as a summer home. Crane, unknown to himself, was a descendant of James Foster, formerly Harrowdale, through his mother's line. His acquisition of Griffin's Ledge represented the first time in nearly 250 years that a Harrowdale descendant had taken ownership of the property. The restoration work was plagued by accidents from the start. Workers reported tools disappearing, only to be found arranged in strange patterns in otherwise empty rooms. Several men fell from scaffolding despite proper safety measures. 3 stonemasons went mad after breaking through a wall in the cellar, babbling about the geometry of the dark before clawing out their own eyes. Crane himself began to experience vivid dreams about ancestors he didn't know he had. In these dreams, They warned him to abandon the project and flee. But Crane, a self-made man with no patience for superstition, pressed on. The situation deteriorated when Crane moved his family into the partially restored east wing of the manor. His wife, Catherine, began hearing whispers in the walls, the same whispers Isolde had documented centuries earlier. Their children, 6-year-old twins, Elliot and Evelyn, developed an obsession with the sealed well on the eastern edge of the property, the same well where Lilia Harrowdale had been found. On the winter solstice of 1895, exactly 234 years after Alistair Harrowdale's ritual, the Crane family vanished without a trace. The only clue was a journal found in Josiah's study, the final entry reading, "They're coming through now." The door was never fully closed. All these years, it was opening inch by inch, and I was the key it needed. Harrowdale blood returned to Harrowdale land. God forgive me, I've doomed us all. The disappearance of the Crane family made international headlines, with theories ranging from elaborate insurance fraud to mass murder. The estate was once again abandoned, this time cordoned off by authorities as a crime scene. Eventually, the case went cold, and Griffin's Ledge passed into legend, a place locals warned their children to avoid. What nobody realized was that Josiah Crane had inadvertently triggered a resurgence of the curse. The entity, having fed on the Crane family, was stronger now and able to extend its reach further than ever before. Across the world, people with even a drop of Harrowdale blood began to experience nightmares, to hear whispers, to see shadows moving at the corners of their vision. Most had no idea why they were being targeted. The knowledge of the Harrowdale curse had been lost to most branches of the family. The grimoires either destroyed or locked away and forgotten. Those who sought medical help were diagnosed with various psychiatric conditions. Those who didn't often met tragic ends. Their deaths filed away as accidents, suicides, or unexplained phenomena. One person who did understand what was happening was Dr. Evelyn Thorne, a professor of folklore at Blackwater University in Massachusetts. Thorne was a descendant of both the original Kestrel family, who had owned the land before the Harrowdales, and through a complex series of marriages over centuries, the Scottish branch of the Harrowdale family as well. Thorne had made the study of family curses her life's work, driven by the fragmentary knowledge of her own heritage passed down through her grandmother. When reports began to surface in 1898 of people across the globe experiencing identical nightmares featuring crescent moons and whispering shadows, she recognized the pattern. Using university resources, Thorne began to track down individuals experiencing these phenomena, constructing an extensive family tree that connected them all back to the original Harrowdales. Her research revealed a disturbing escalation in the curse's activity. What had once been a gradual predation on the bloodline over centuries had accelerated into something more urgent, more hungry. In a paper published in an obscure academic journal, Thorne wrote, "The entity tethered to the Harrowdale bloodline appears to be approaching some form of maturation. Previous manifestations suggest a pattern of feeding in dormancy, like a parasite that gorges itself and then digests. But the current wave of activity indicates continuous feeding across multiple branches of the family simultaneously. Something has changed in the relationship between predator and prey." Thorne's attempts to warn affected families met with limited success. Most dismissed her theories as academic fantasy. Others, already struggling with what they believed to be mental illness, were further traumatized by the suggestion that something supernatural was targeting them. A few, however, recognized the truth in her words and sought her help. Together, this small group began to compile their experiences, comparing notes on effective defenses and identifying patterns in the entity's behavior. They discovered that certain materials, silver, iron, and salt, seemed to repel the influence temporarily. They found that the entity was strongest during the new moon and weakest during the full moon, the opposite of traditional werewolf lore, Thorne noted. because this is not a creature of our natural world, but its inverse. Most significantly, they realized that the entity could not directly harm its victims. Instead, it influenced them towards self-destruction, clouding their minds with despair or manipulating circumstances to place them in danger. This explained why so many Harrowdale descendants had died by suicide or in accidents that seemed just plausible enough to avoid supernatural scrutiny. Armed with this knowledge, Thorne and her allies developed a set of protocols to protect themselves: regular cleansing rituals, protective circles of salt and iron, and a buddy system to ensure no one was ever alone during vulnerable periods like the new moon. For several years, these measures kept the worst at bay. The group grew, with Thorne eventually tracking down over 100 Harrowdale descendants across 4 continents. Together, they formed a loose network they called the Scattered Ones, sharing information and resources to combat their shared curse. But the entity was adaptive. As its victims developed defenses, it developed new methods of attack. Physical manifestations became more common: shadows that moved independently of their owners, reflections that showed different faces, voices that called to victims from empty rooms. Several members of the Scattered Ones disappeared despite following all precautions. Their homes found empty but undisturbed, as if they had simply stepped out of reality. The breaking point came in 1914, when Thorne herself vanished during an expedition to Griffin's Ledge. She had gone there with 3 colleagues, all Harrowdale descendants, believing that the key to ending the curse might lie at its origin point. Their equipment was found scattered around the sealed well where Lilia Harrowdale had died centuries earlier. Of the 4, only one was ever found: Gideon Shaw, a distant cousin of Thorne's. Shaw was discovered wandering the moors 3 weeks later. His hair turned completely white, his mind shattered. Before being committed to an asylum, he managed to convey a fragmented message to his sister. The door, it's not a door anymore. It's a mouth, and it's so hungry. Evelyn saw what was on the other side. She understood. The bloodline was never meant to endure. It has to end, all of it, while there's still time. Following Thorne's disappearance, the Scattered Ones fell into disarray. Without her leadership and scholarly approach, many fell back on superstition or abandoned the fight entirely. Some branches of the family managed to maintain the protective practices she had established, passing them down as family traditions without fully explaining their purpose. Throughout the 20th century, the curse continued to manifest in various ways, adapting to the changing world. During World War I, an unusually high number of soldiers with Harrowdale blood died in bizarre circumstances, not from enemy fire, but from accidents in training, strange illnesses that baffled military doctors, or by wandering into no man's land as if called by voices only they could hear. The Great Depression saw a spike in suicides among Harrowdale descendants, many leaving behind identical notes that read simply, "The Whispering Ones say this is the only way." The development of psychiatric medications in the mid-20th century provided some relief to those experiencing the mental effects of the curse, though the entity eventually found ways around this chemical barrier. One branch of the family, the Kincaids of Seattle, descended from the American Fosters, took a technological approach to the problem. Richard Kincaid, a software engineer, developed an algorithm to track unusual deaths and psychiatric diagnoses around the world, looking for patterns that might indicate Harrowdale descendants being targeted. His system identified several previously unknown branches of the family, allowing them to be warned and protected. Kincaid's daughter, Julia, expanded on her father's work, creating an online database that Harrowdale descendants could use to share information anonymously. This digital network became the modern incarnation of the Scattered Ones, with members across the globe supporting each other and documenting their experiences. The most comprehensive of these accounts came from Akira Sato, a novelist living in Hong Kong whose grandmother had been a foster from Massachusetts. Sato experienced her first manifestation of the curse at age 29, unusually late, suggesting that the entity had initially overlooked her due to her mixed heritage. Sato's experiences began with the standard nightmares and whispers, but quickly escalated to more elaborate phenomena. She reported waking to find her apartment rearranged, with furniture placed in geometric patterns similar to those described in Isolde's original grimoire. Her computer would turn on by itself, displaying text in an alphabet she didn't recognize but somehow understood. Messages promising power and knowledge in exchange for a simple favor: to organize a family reunion. Using Julia Kincaid's network, Sato connected with other Harrowdale descendants experiencing similar escalations. Together, they noticed a pattern. The entity seemed to be making the same offer to multiple family members simultaneously, always framed as a reunion or gathering of the bloodline. This led to a disturbing theory. The entity was attempting to reverse Isolde Harrowdale's original strategy of scattering the family. It wanted the bloodline concentrated again, gathered in one place where it could feed more efficiently, or perhaps for some purpose none of them had yet guessed. The situation reached a critical point in 2011, when an anonymous donor offered to fund a genealogical study for people with certain uncommon genetic markers that Julia Kincaid recognized corresponded precisely with Harrowdale descendants. The study invited participants to a fully paid retreat at a recently restored historic manor in Cornwall, England. The manor's name was never mentioned in the promotional materials, but Kincaid's contacts in the UK confirmed what she feared. It was Griffin's Ledge. Working frantically, the Scattered Ones launched a counter-campaign warning all known Harrowdale descendants to avoid the study. They created fake news stories about fraud associated with the project and even reported it to authorities as a potential cult recruitment scheme. Their efforts prevented most of their network from falling into the trap, but they couldn't reach everyone. 17 people attended the retreat at Griffin's Ledge. None were ever seen again. Official investigations concluded that the group had fallen victim to a mass suicide pact, though no bodies were recovered. The manor itself burned to the ground a week after their disappearance, the fire so intense that it melted the stone foundations. Ground-penetrating radar later revealed something unusual beneath where the cellar had been. A perfectly circular void, 30 feet in diameter, that no equipment could penetrate. Attempts to drill into this space were abandoned after 3 separate drilling teams quit, all citing nightmares and voices telling them to stop. The loss of those 17 descendants, the largest gathering of Harrowdale blood in over 350 years, seemed to satisfy the entity temporarily. For several years, following the Griffin's Ledge incident, manifestations of the curse decreased significantly. Members of the Scattered Ones dared to hope that perhaps the entity had gorged itself into dormancy again. This hope was shattered in 2016, when Julia Kincaid's tracking algorithm detected a new pattern. Harrowdale descendants around the world were having children at an unprecedented rate. Many reported feeling compelled to reproduce, describing an overwhelming biological urge that overrode their previous decisions to remain childless. Many Harrowdale descendants aware of their curse chose not to have children to avoid passing it on. More disturbing still, an unusually high percentage of these children were born with the crescent birthmark. The first time in recorded history that more than a handful of marked Harrowdales had existed simultaneously. Dr. Elias Norton, a geneticist and Harrowdale descendant himself, managed to obtain DNA samples from several of these children. His analysis revealed something impossible: genetic markers that didn't match either parent, segments of DNA that didn't appear to be human at all when compared to the standard genome. Something is changing these children on a fundamental level, Norton wrote in his report to the Scattered Ones. The entity isn't just feeding on the bloodline anymore, it's reshaping it. For what purpose I can't begin to guess, but I don't believe these children are entirely ours anymore. This brings us to the present day, where the remaining members of the Scattered Ones face an impossible dilemma. The entity that has haunted their family for centuries appears to be entering a new phase of its existence, using their bloodline to incarnate itself into our world through a new generation of children. Yet these children, whatever else they might be, are still their sons and daughters, innocent of any wrongdoing. Some advocate for drastic measures, sterilization of all known Harrowdale descendants, or even more extreme solutions they dare not speak aloud. Others believe that the answer lies in returning to Isolde's original research, that somewhere in the grimoires and journals, there might be a way to sever the connection between their bloodline and the entity permanently. A third faction, led by Akira Sato, proposes something radical: to stop fighting the curse and instead attempt to communicate with it. For centuries, we've seen this entity as a predator and ourselves as prey, Sato argues. But what if that's not the whole story? What if there's something it wants beyond simply feeding on us? The original texts speak of a doorway, of something trying to cross over. What if all this time it's been trying to tell us something? This approach has gained traction among younger Harrowdale descendants, particularly those born with the crescent mark who have lived with the entity's presence their entire lives. They report that when they stop resisting the whispers and instead listen to them, the messages they receive are not always threatening. There are fragments of knowledge, glimpses of a reality operating on different rules than our own, and always a sense of desperate urgency. They're afraid of something, reports Clara Vance, a 16-year-old with the birthmark. Something is coming, something even they fear, and they need us to survive it. The Harrowdale bloodline was never meant to endure this long on its own. It was meant to evolve. This interpretation remains highly controversial among the scattered ones. Is it genuine insight, or is the entity simply adapting its tactics again, finding a new way to manipulate its prey by presenting itself as a potential ally? The debate continues, but time may be running out. Reports of manifestations are increasing again, and the marked children are exhibiting disturbing new abilities: telepathic connections with each other, influence over electronic devices, and in some cases, the power to manipulate physical reality in small but significant ways. Whatever the truth about the Harrowdale curse may be, one thing is certain: the bloodline that was never meant to endure has endured. Against all odds, across continents and centuries, through tragedy and persecution, the descendants of Alistair and Isolde Harrowdale have survived. Whether that survival represents a victory or merely a prolonged defeat remains to be seen. The most recent development in this ongoing saga occurred just last month, when all the marked children across the world reported having the same dream on the same night. In this dream, they stood together at the edge of the void beneath Griffin's Ledge. A voice spoke to them, not in whispers this time, but clearly and directly. "The veil is thinning," it said. "What was separated must be rejoined. What was scattered must be gathered. The bloodline endures for a purpose, and that purpose is now at hand. The door will open one final time, and you must choose whether to close it forever or step through into what awaits." The shadow has been patient. The shadow has been watching. The shadow has been preparing you. The time of choosing is near. What this message means, what choice these children will face, and what consequences that choice will have for the rest of humanity, these questions remain unanswered. The Harrowdale descendants continue their vigil, watching and waiting for the next manifestation of their ancient curse, hoping that when the final confrontation comes, they will make the right decision. As for Griffin's Ledge itself, the land remains empty, cordoned off by authorities due to environmental concerns. Locals still avoid it, though few remember exactly why. At night, lights can sometimes be seen moving through the ruins. Investigators say they're just local teenagers daring each other to venture into the haunted manor. But those who have lived near the land for generations know better. They know that the whispering ones are growing louder. They know that the shadows are growing longer. And they know that whatever has been watching the Harrowdale bloodline all these centuries is getting ready to step into the light. The question now is not whether the Harrowdale bloodline was meant to endure. It's what it has endured for. And the answer to that question may determine the fate of far more than just one family. For those of you watching who may have experienced unusual nightmares involving crescents and whispers, who may have found yourselves drawn to this story for reasons you can't explain, who may even bear a small birthmark at the base of your neck that seems to darken and fade with the phases of the moon, consider this not just a history, but a warning. Check your family tree. Look for the names we've mentioned: Harrowdale, Hawthorne, Lafayette, McLeod, Crane, Kincaid, Sato. If you find them, know that you are not alone. The scattered ones are still out there, still fighting, still searching for answers. And whatever you do, do stay away from Griffin's Ledge. The door is not yet fully open, but it's no longer fully closed. And something is waiting just on the other side. Something that knows your name before you've spoken it. Something that has been watching your family for longer than you can imagine. Something that whispers in the dark. The bloodline endures. The bloodline endures. The bloodline endures. But the most terrifying question of all remains unanswered. What if it was never meant to? They're watching you now, through your eyes. They've always been watching. If you're still watching, dear viewer, I should inform you that what follows was not part of our original script for Forgotten Whispers. The production team insists they never recorded this segment, yet here it is, appended to the file, discovered only during final editing. I've been researching the Harrowdale case for nearly 3 years now. What began as a simple historical curiosity became something more. I visited archives across 3 continents, interviewed dozens of people claiming Harrowdale ancestry, and yes, I've even stood on the grounds of what was once Griffin's Ledge Manor. The locals call it the Dead Land now. Nothing grows there. No birds sing. The air feels thick, as if you're trying to breathe underwater. I spent only 20 minutes on the property before the headache started. That night, I had my first dream of the crescent shadow. Since then, the dreams have become more frequent, more vivid, more interactive. They speak to me now, offering to show me things no human has ever seen, knowledge no mortal mind was meant to contain. All they ask in return is that I use this platform, Forgotten Whispers, to reach out to others, to find the scattered ones, to bring them home. I've discovered something the Harrowdales never knew. Something Dr. Thorne was on the verge of understanding before she disappeared. The entity isn't trying to eradicate the bloodline. It's trying to perfect it. The deaths, the suffering, these were tests, culling the weak, strengthening the survivors, preparing the bloodline for what comes next. You see, the door beneath Griffin's Ledge isn't just a passage for the entity to come through. It's a gateway for something to go out. The entity has been reshaping the Harrowdale bloodline for centuries, adapting it, evolving it into something that can survive elsewhere, beyond our reality, beyond our comprehension. The marked children born in recent years are the culmination of this work. They're not fully human anymore, but they're not monsters either. They're pioneers, ambassadors, the first generation capable of existing in both realities simultaneously. I've met some of these children. I've interviewed them when their parents weren't listening. They showed me things, impossible things. One girl, barely 7 years old, held out her hand, and the shadows in the room gathered in her palm like liquid darkness. A boy of 10 closed his eyes and described in perfect detail a conversation I'd had 3 days earlier in a locked room alone. They all say the same thing. Something is coming. A convergence. A moment when our reality and the one beyond the door will momentarily touch, creating a bridge. And when that happens, they will be given a choice: to stay here in our limited existence, or to cross over into a place where the laws of physics are mere suggestions, where consciousness itself is the primary building block of reality. What's truly unsettling is how eagerly they anticipate this choice, how confident they are that crossing over is not just possible, but desirable. "We were never meant to stay here," one child told me, her crescent birthmark darkening as she spoke. "This world is just our cocoon." Since beginning this investigation, I've discovered something else, something I wasn't looking for, something I didn't want to find. 2 months ago, while examining old family photographs, I noticed a small mark at the base of my neck, a birthmark I'd never seen before, in the shape of a crescent moon. I've had the DNA test done, traced my ancestry, and yes, there it is. 6 generations back, a great-great-great-grandmother whose maiden name was MacLeod. I am one of them. The entity has been whispering to me my entire life. I just didn't know how to listen, and now I do. This episode of Forgotten Whispers was never meant to be merely informative. It's a beacon, a calling, a gathering of the scattered ones. If you felt a strange resonance with this story, if the mention of whispering shadows and crescent moons strikes a chord deep within you, you might be one of us. The blood of the Harrowdales might run in your veins, diluted but not forgotten. The entity remembers. The entity recognizes its own, and the entity is calling us home. Check your neck for the mark. Listen for the whispers in empty rooms. Watch for shadows that move against the light. These aren't signs of madness. They're confirmation of your heritage, of your potential, of your destiny. The scattered ones are gathering once more, not to fight the entity, but to embrace it, to complete the work that began with Alistair Harrowdale in 1652. The next phase of human evolution isn't technological or biological, it's dimensional, a transcendence beyond the limitations of physical reality. The children will lead the way. They're already halfway between worlds, and those of us with the blood, even diluted through generations, can follow. The door is opening. The time of choosing approaches. If you feel the call, if you know in your bones that you're part of this story, there are ways to find us. Ways the entity will show you if you're willing to listen. Forgotten Whispers isn't just a YouTube channel. It's the modern incarnation of Isolde's Grimoire, a guide for those who carry the blood. For the rest of you watching out of mere curiosity or for the thrill of a scary story, heed this warning. What has been set in motion cannot be stopped. The convergence is coming. The veil between worlds is thinning, and when it tears open completely, those unprepared will find the new reality challenging. The Harrowdale bloodline was never meant to endure in this world. It was meant to transcend it. I've said too much already. They're watching now. Not just the entity, but the others. The ones who've always known about the doorways between worlds and have appointed themselves their guardians. They'll try to stop us, to maintain the separation between realities they've enforced for millennia. This video will likely be removed soon. They have ways of silencing those who speak too freely about the doors and what waits beyond them. But the entity is stronger now, and its chosen ones are everywhere. The time of hiding, of scattering is over. The time of gathering has begun. Listen for the whispers. Watch for the shadows. Look for the mark. Find your way to Griffin's Ledge. Find your way home. The preceding video was found on an unmarked hard drive delivered to the Forgotten Whispers post office box. The individual claiming to be our host in this footage is not affiliated with our channel. Authorities have been notified, and an investigation is ongoing regarding the 17 individuals reported missing in Cornwall, England last month. Forgotten Whispers does not endorse or encourage viewers to investigate the location described as Griffin's Ledge. This content has been uploaded for documentary purposes only. If you've watched this far, you're already part of it. The mark will appear soon. Don't be afraid when the dreams begin. Remember, we were never meant to merely endure. We were meant to transcend. The scattered will gather. The door will open, and the bloodline will finally fulfill its purpose. Look for us in the shadows. Listen for us in the silence. We'll find you. We always do.